We had a critical incident where Andre Booker passed away in the line of duty several years ago. He was involved in an incident where his vehicle got into a pond and he drowned. And several of the officers, this was like in January, the water was cold and they tried to get in and swim and try to save him, and they couldn't.
The temperatures were in the low 30s that night, being in January, and it was just incredibly difficult to stay in the water. All of our rescue attempts were actually in vain. You know, there was no way that we could get to him that night. I was devastated. You know, it's really the worst night of my life, you know, certainly professionally, but more so even personally.
We called out every one of our chaplains that night because it was a lot of people involved in that incident. They worked with their mental health folk to try to provide counseling, and that was, you know, one of the situations where I call it ringing the bell. And we rang the bell and they came, and basically it was no ifs, ands, buts about it. They just said, you know, tell me where you need me.
What I do remember specifically was again, while we're all there and while there was all kinds of support there, just looking over to the corner and seeing just the line of police chaplains that were there. They were ready, they were available should we have a need as individuals or even as a group. You know, for me personally, those services are invaluable.
These special volunteer ministers have provided pastoral care and spiritual support to the Henrico County Police Division since the late 1970s. However, their work is anchored in military traditions that date back centuries.
The origin of chaplains actually goes back to medieval Catholic times. You know, back then as well as now, in times of turmoil, you know, men and women, of course, turned to clergy, towards religion, to help ease their pain or to help give them strength in battle, those type of things. Jumping from that period up until our history, you know, when we were fighting for our independence, our country was still evolving. A number of other conflicts were in the process, specifically the French and Indian War. There was a young man there who would later become very dominant in our history, George Washington. At that time, he realized that it was a necessity, almost something that was essential, that all units have a chaplain to give religious services to the soldiers. In between conflicts, of course, with downsizing and the reduction of forces, as we still do today, soldiers were let go, sent home. Same thing with clergymen. They would, once their services were not needed in the military scenario, they would kind of just fade back into civilian life and continue with what they did before they got called up.
Henrico's police and fire divisions each have their own chaplains. Police first called upon local clergy in the mid-1970s to help notify family members when a relative was killed in a car accident, suicide, or homicide. Now, the division has about a dozen chaplains on call at any given time. Their names and faces may change year to year, but these volunteers are all key parts of a support system that helps officers manage the stresses of serving and protecting the community.
They're there to try to help the public and also to help the officer. One of the things that we encourage them to do is to try to get to know the officers. And one of the best ways to get to know the officers is to sit in the car beside them for, you know, several hours. And they will ride with officers throughout the entire county. And some of them will ride for an entire shift. Some of them will ride for a couple hours. And they'll just, you know, let them know that they're there, if there's anything they need.
I'm not sure how many pastors understand what the law enforcement job is, what the officer goes through, unless this pastor has deliberately taken the time to find out something about it. I've suggested to pastors, if you have law enforcement in your congregation, go ride with them. You know, spend some time with them on the job and see exactly what they deal with, what they are involved with on a regular basis, the kind of response from the public. I do ride-alongs because it gives me an opportunity to meet the officers, to establish a relationship with them, and it also provides an opportunity to keep the chaplain's ministry in front of the officers so that when something happens, either professionally on the job or perhaps even personally, hopefully they will remember that there is a chaplain available to assist them regardless of what the circumstance is. You know, I see our role is kind of taking the load off of you. All right? You're involved in doing your police work. Who's going to deal with these people who show up, or who's going to deal with these people when you have to go to the house and tell them? I think just establishing relationships and getting to know the officers is the reason I do it. I think there are officers who fear that once one of us climbs into the car, we're going to hit them with a 25-pound Bible, you know, and that's not the case. I operate on the principle of the officer opening the door, but I'm not going to force religion on the officer. I'm going to open some doors. We're going to talk about some things. But for me, the burden is on the officer. And if they want to talk about faith, if they want to talk about religion, then, you know, fine, we'll go that route.
I don't think people recognize the specific challenges and stressors that first responders have. They see some pretty tragic and horrific kinds of events that most of us would never see in our lifetime. And it can take a pretty heavy toll emotionally. So for an individual who's looking for some support going through an emotional issue, it's good to have as many resources as possible. And the chaplaincy program would offer that service to those who are looking for something that's faith-based.
Okay. Counseling is a big part of our job. Many of our chaplains, if not all of our chaplains, have experience in pastoral care or counseling to some degree or another. One of our jobs is to be available to help officers process emotions as well. They're human beings and they're real people, and they've got families back at home, and they've got friendships in and out of the division, and so the biggest thing has been seeing that they are real people too, and given all the misconceptions and misperceptions that we have about police, even in today's stressful environment, it's good to know that there are just really, really good people serving Henrico County out there.
So now as we go into small groups, we just ask for your blessing during this time. In your name we pray, amen.
It's a fine line of what part of our job is talking about our faith and sharing that openly with people, and then the other half of that is just sort of being a listening presence, as I would call it. I have found that the best thing to do is really just kind of take the cues from the people that you're interacting with. I have always been of the mind that I want to be there and I want to hear your story, and I like to be just a presence there and be available to answer questions, but also just to be available to listen. I think that's a big part of our job, is just listening, using our ears more than our mouths. If you know that you have the chaplain program to fall back on, not only for the needs of the families in the community, but also for your own needs as an officer, it helps you do your job better, knowing that there is somebody caring for you as you care for others.
Some of a chaplain's most important work comes in helping residents and others in the community during difficult times.
Good evening, sir. My name is Officer Goff. I work for Henrico Police, and this is Chaplain Boyd Jackson. Do you mind if we come in and talk to you for just a minute?
Yeah, come on in.
The general public would probably be surprised how many times they get called out to critical incidents and accidents, deaths, things such as that. It's hard for the officers, and it's also difficult for the chaplains. But the chaplains have some specialized training in dealing with death and death notifications.
When you knock on a door at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the person comes to the door and sees somebody in civilian clothes and a couple of police officers, they know immediately something's wrong. And I think at that point, you're having to overcome that. You're having to bring the bad news. And then you're trying to provide some kind of reassurance or information that would be helpful. And depending on the circumstances, after we've been there for a while, we may have a prayer with the folks. We may not. It all depends on them and the situation. And I will stay with a family as long as necessary so that if there is a need, I don't want to leave them alone. I don't want to leave them wondering about things. And so many times I will stay quite a while with the family just to be there and to be able to provide any kind of answers. Would you like me to go be down there with you, or you think?
Like the police division, Henrico's Division of Fire relies on its chaplains to serve as spiritual first responders. Fire usually has only a few ministers on its roster, but their compassion and gentle care can be invaluable during a crisis.
The chaplain and I have a really good relationship, so reaching out to the chaplain is a blessing, if you will, to be able to speak with him or her. It's that conduit, that link between him and her and myself, that it's very easing, if you will, that feeling of knowing that they're there and they're available to help us at a moment's notice.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, this is the fire chaplain. Well, I retired from the military and the fire service, so I've had that as a background. So we have a unique relationship as far as a bond, a trust, kind of been there, done that sort of connection with some of the folks that oftentimes people will open up to us about some things because they know we understand, maybe more than with some other folks. Life can be difficult and day-to-day situations can be challenging, and certainly if you're operating in the realm of public safety, every day is a new day and every call is a new call. And who knows what's on the other end of what you respond to. We're just part of a larger effort for overall health and wellness for the folks in public safety, but also as a resource to the community. Morning. My name is Mike Woods. I'm one of the chaplains with Henrico Fire, and I was asked to come by and talk to you in reference to Mr. Smith. I understand he's one of your family members. The analogy that I've given people before is a lot of times what we do is not so much about what we do, but just simply showing up. A lot of times it's just showing up and shutting up. In other words, listening to people, just being there, come alongside of them. Some people find a certain amount of comfort just knowing that there is a resource there that they can tap into if needed.
We're used to fire and EMS response to come in, you take care of the problem, you go. He has to kind of maintain contact on a longer period of time, so to kind of assess how things are progressing and be able to guide the folks to resources that they might not normally have in place.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you, sir.
We're engaged in station visits, and there's no set pattern to the station visits. It's basically kind of a ad lib type situation where I'll just go by and pop in. Rarely do I make an appointment unless there's been a call to come to one of the firehouses or one of the other facilities or an incident scene. So it's just an opportunity to develop relationships with folks before something happens, and just kind of develop the relationships and the camaraderie, and so if something happens or when something happens, the first time they see me is not in a emergency type situation.
Quite frequently we come across a situation involving the public or our co-workers where you need to kind of touch into that spiritual component, and having someone that's trained in that is a great resource.
We're able to reach folks in ways that a lot of other folks can't, and I think it just contributes to the overall wellness of the workers and even the civilians that we've interacted with.
I can't even imagine not having chaplains available to us during critical incidents. So I think, honestly, I think we'd be lost if we didn't have them.
I believe I've had a calling in my life to do it. And
a different type of calling than what I believe is required to be in public safety, but a calling nevertheless.
Just wanting to be able to be in our community, being with our officers, being able to give back has always been just an important part of my job, be it paid or not paid. In this case, it's volunteer, and I love that.
I think there's more value to having a program than there is in not having one. And I'm glad Henrico is willing to provide one for the county. It's my privilege to be part of this.